Hello, good morning from the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. Hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. If I'm having an amazing day, you should be having an amazing day. Today, I would like to talk to you about the Jewish question. Die Judenfrage. Are you ready? Let's go! The Malaysian National Socialist leader, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, is famous for having said that the Jews rule the world by proxy. Yes, according to Dr. Mahathir, not only are they hooked-nosed, but they also get others to fight and die for them. This is why I say that we be very, very careful before simply platforming any person who says that they are pro-Palestine, because many of these people, in fact, are not pro-Palestine because they actually care about the Palestinians, but merely because they hate Jewish people, like Dr. Mahathir. So, just like people like Jake Shields or right-wing fascists like Jackson Hinkle, Mahathir, of course, is no friend of the left, and he mainly supports Palestine, well, because he sees it as an ethno-religious conflict against the Juden people. Yes, Mahathir is our very own version of the National Socialist leader who builds a car that is fit for all the masses to use, that comes at an affordable rate. And he created many jobs for certain people. He gave roti to many people of a certain group. But I can see that even now, well-meaning people are falling into the trap of Jew hatred and basically barking up the wrong tree. You see, not only am I seeing a few instances where people are now doing Holocaust denial, I'm also seeing cases of people saying that the United States government and the British government work for the Zionists and not the other way around. It's not like the Zionists work for the American and the British governments, but rather the British and American leaders work for the Zionists. Now, regardless of whether you think Zionists represent all Jews, this take is a dangerously slippery slope because it can eventually veer towards anti-Semitism. And today I hope to explain why. Because fundamentally, Zionists are not these all-powerful creatures that rule the world. In fact, Jews, as a matter of fact, do not rule the world. It should be common sense to anyone who's not an anti-Semite. But, you know, people who are too fixated on the Zionist lobby controlling America, or the Rothschild family, in the end can end up inadvertently falling into the trap of anti-Semitism. Now, I have to choose my words very, very carefully for this video. First of all, I have to make it clear that I'm not supporting Zionists or Zionism. I think that Zionism is in fact an odious, racist, colonialist ideology, okay? It's an ideology that's practiced by the most reactionary elements of the Jewish community. So, while not every Jewish person is a Zionist, and we know that for a fact, certainly a great many Zionists are Jewish, but they're not progressive Jewish people. They are reactionary, right? But having said that, whether you like it or not, Zionism was a response to brutal persecution of Jewish people. Now, we know for a fact that Zionists are reactionary, they're unhinged, they're far right-wing, but they exist as a response to the persecution that Jewish people faced in Europe And the reason why Zionists are brutal is because they have been hardened by their material circumstances. But no, Zionists are not, and never have been, the puppet master that control the imperialist Western powers, which are entities that would exist and do what they do with or without the Zionist lobby. In fact, the poster boy of Zionism, Theodor Herzl himself, admits that he himself is an employee rather than an employer in his book, Der Judenstaat. I will show you an excerpt from Der Judenstaat, and this is what he says.
Palestine is our ever memorable historic home. The very nature of Palestine would attract our people with a force of marvelous potency. If His Majesty the Sultan were to give us Palestine, we could in return undertake to regulate the whole finances of Turkey. We should there form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. We should, as a neutral state, remain in contact with all Europe, which would have to guarantee our existence. The sanctuaries of Christendom would be safeguarded by assigning to them an extraterritorial status, such as is well known to the law of nations. We should form a guard of honor full of big, strong, manly men, not little girly men, about these sanctuaries, answering for the fulfillment of this duty with our existence. This guard of honor would be the great symbol of the solution of the Jewish question after 18 centuries of Jewish suffering.
So was Herzl a racist and an imperialist? Yes, he most certainly was. As were most academics of the 19th century Europe. Hell, even Karl Marx, the poster boy of the left wing, was also a racist and a Western chauvinist by today's standards. Yes, most Victorians had an extremely chauvinistic view towards non-Western cultures and non-Western people, and they really believed that Westernization would lead to the betterment of the uncivilized people. Most Victorians did have an Orientalist worldview, but Herzl was a product of his own material circumstances. Theodor Herzl was basically a creature of his time and place. And even though he was a reactionary, the fact is that, he had... Oh, helicopter. Where's the helicopter? He had a point that basically the Jewish people of Europe were indeed being persecuted. So he could diagnose the problem correctly. He had a correct diagnosis for the problem, that the Jews in Europe were unwanted and unwelcome. But his solution, his medicine for the problem was faulty. Rather than fighting for emancipation of the Jewish people in their own home countries, not in Palestine, Herzl and his friends decided it would be better to take over the region known as Palestine and basically do to the local Palestinian people what the Europeans did to people in the non-Western world. Basically, Zionists wanted to become just like Europeans. So when you see the brutality and savagery of the Zionists, it's very dangerous to assume that this has anything to do with Jewish people. I mean, Jewish culture. So when you see the brutality and the savagery of the Israeli army in Palestine. In fact, I don't even want to mention what they did during the Nakba, but you can read up about it in Ilan Pape's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Oh my God, some of the accounts are basically very similar to what soldiers would do in Nanking. When you read that up, you cannot help but wonder, how could people who have been persecuted for so long end up doing the same thing towards others? Well, there's the old trope of how people who were once bullied become bullies themselves. Not all, but some. Okay, I'm not trying to villainize bully victims here, but people who were once bullied and who felt weak, when they get power, sometimes they may basically strike back with brutal ferocity, because they have been hardened by their material conditions. It's kind of like how African Americans, despite being the descendants of slaves, despite being the descendants of historically oppressed people, end up becoming oppressors when they join the United States Army to go and do bad things all around the world, because they feel that that's their means of survival. It's not like the United States Army is controlled by African Americans. When an African American war criminal does bad things in Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan, but rather the African American war criminal has basically become hardened by his material conditions, basically. So there's no reason to think that a person who grew up suffering oppression, or who historically marginalized people, cannot then end up becoming oppressors when the shoe is on the other foot. So basically there were two distinct types of political movements in order to solve the problem of Jewish persecution. One of them was the left-wing movement, which was basically to emancipate the Jewish people in their own mother countries. Not the countries where their ancestors came from, but rather the countries that they were born in and raised in. That was the socialist movement. So Jewish people like Karl Marx, Rosa Luxemburg, and so on and so forth, tried to get the Jews to see themselves as a class rather than a race, and to stand in solidarity with the oppressed workers of their society. But there was the right-wing version, the Zionist form of emancipation, which is not left-wing, it is not class-conscious. Ever wonder why most Zionists hate communism with a passion? But rather it was ethno-nationalist, and ethno-nationalist not in an Eastern sense, but in a Western sense, a blood and soil sense, in the sense that if you have a certain quota of blood, you have a right to take over someone's house. And not surprisingly, the European reactionaries found that form of Jewish emancipation more palatable. As you know, Churchill and Lord Balfour were anti-Semites themselves. In fact, Churchill believed that communism was a Jewish conspiracy. But Churchill supported Zionism for two reasons. Because for one, it would get the Jews away from Europe. And historically, the Europeans have never liked Jewish people. Look at how they treat Jewish people who stand for Palestine. They only like you if you serve their geopolitical interests. And not only would it get the Jews away from Europe, they would then serve as satellites in the Middle East. In the same way, the Liberian founders were satellites for the United States in Africa. You see? But the fact of the matter is that race ultras, as I've mentioned, and that also includes Chinese Malaysian race ultras or Malay race ultras or any type of race ultras, they do more harm than good for their community. Because Zionists are very, very similar to the Chinese Malaysian race ultras. Like, if you don't agree with them 100%, they call you Hanjian or race traitor. Like, I don't speak Chinese and I consider myself Malaysian first, Chinese second. So I get called all kinds of nasty names by race ultras. And the same thing you will see with Zionists when Jewish people don't share their views, or they don't share their race essentialist worldview. Well then, eventually they'll start calling those Jewish people kapos, which means a Nazi collaborator or Jewish race traitors. Yes, even though their intentions might have been good, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I'm not pretending they had any good intentions for the people of Palestine, but their intentions might have made sense, right? Zionism makes sense on a logical basis, in a sense that, yes, something needs to be done to address the problem of Jewish persecution. But their answer to that problem was basically to create an ethno-state and basically do to the people of Palestine what people in Europe did to non-Western people. So basically, they wanted to become the thing that was bullying them as a defense mechanism. Does that make sense? It is a very, very dangerous, slippery slope to walk on when you say the Zionists control the Western leaders, because Zionists have always been used as puppets in the Middle East in order to further the interests of the Western imperialist powers and the owners of global financial capital, not the other way around. Just like the Liberians, the founders of Liberia have also been used as puppets in order to advance the interests of the United States. But when you say that people like Joe Biden or Rishi Sunak are basically being controlled by the Zionists, not only is that a slippery slope towards anti-Semitism, because eventually you'll say that, oh, Jews are being treated like a special class, right? But it also basically absolves these Western leaders of their accountability in the savagery that goes on around the world. But Joe Biden himself said, you know, Israel is the best damn investment that we ever had, right? And if there weren't an Israel, we'd have to invent one. Take a look.
It's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region.
So the fact of the matter is that the European reactionaries are still persecuting the Jews. But this time, they're doing it under the cloak of benevolence, by pretending that they care about the Jewish people and are trying to right a historic wrong. But they are making the Jewish people the fall guy for their crimes around the world by saying that all Zionists are Jews, or anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. When Western leaders say that, they know what they're doing, because they know that Zionists are deeply, deeply unpopular all over the world. Yes. And Western leaders are basically trying to shift the blame, to remove the resentment. You know how Donald Trump likes to act as if, you know, loyalty to Israel is like the utmost necessity of any American. These Christo-fascist reactionaries in America themselves are not big fans of Jews. In fact, they want to get all the Jews in the Middle East because they believe it will spark the Armageddon. But they believe that the Jews will end up having to convert to Christianity or die. So they're not big fans of the Jews either. And the fact is that American politicians are very, very cunning. So if you've been misguided by Trump into thinking that his boss is Benjamin Netanyahu and not Benjamin Netanyahu that is his employee, well, you have sadly fallen into the trap of unintentional anti-Semitism. Because, you know, to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu is really Donald Trump's boss or any American leader's boss puts you on the slippery slope towards anti-Semitism, because Benjamin Netanyahu is an employee, okay? But the point is, yeah, we've got to blame the source of the problem. And what is the source of the problem? The source of the problem is capital. Yes, go read Lenin's book, Imperialism is the Highest Stage of Capitalism. The creation of Israel is basically a symptom of late-stage capitalism. And it is how the Western capitalist ruling class basically safeguards their interests in the Middle East by using the Jewish people as their satellites, right? They're using the reactionary class of Jewish people as their satellites in the Middle East. The Zionists are basically the Jewish battalion of the American empire, right? So ultimately though, in order to safeguard their oil interests in the Middle East, the Zionists are basically the hired thugs who have to do the dirty work for them in order to ensure their own survival. So did they make a bad choice? Yes. Did the Zionists make a deal with the devil? Yes, they did. But that was not something that they made, you know, for no reason. There was a reason why they turned reactionary in the first place. Just like there's a reason why Chinese ultras in Malaysia turned reactionary and insular in the first place. And there is a reason why they made this deal with the devil. Okay? And ultimately though, we have to blame the imperialist, capitalist ruling class, which is comprised of all races and religions, and we shouldn't think that the imperialist, capitalist ruling class is even all comprised of Zionists or mainly comprised of Jews, because that's where you get on the slippery slope towards anti-Semitism. Okay, that's all I have to say today. Thank you for listening to me. And if you like my content, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much. Have a good day.